The hushed grandeur of the courtroom felt like a gilded cage. Every whisper echoed. Every rustle of a silk suit seemed to judge. Elias Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with steel and skyscrapers, stood rigid, his jaw a fortress of barely contained anger. He was accustomed to commanding boardrooms, not being dissected under the cold gaze of public scrutiny. Across the aisle, cradling not one, but 4 bundles of blankets, sat a woman who was once, briefly, his everything. Isabella Moretti. Her name, once a sweet melody, now felt like a shard of ice in his memory. Isabella looked fragile, yet there was an unyielding strength in the way she held her precious cargo. Her once vibrant eyes, though shadowed by exhaustion, held a quiet defiance that pricked at Elias. He remembered those eyes sparkling with laughter, shimmering with tears of joy on the day he'd proposed, amidst a cascade of white roses on his private yacht. That had been 2 years ago, a lifetime away. Their engagement had been a whirlwind of dazzling events, whispered envy, and headlines. Then, just weeks before the wedding, he'd received a terse, anonymous email with a grainy photograph. Isabella, entering a secluded clinic, an image that screamed betrayal to his paranoid, business-hardened mind. Convinced she was planning to use him, he had, in a fit of cold fury, severed all ties, publicly humiliating her. He'd sent a brief, brutal note, canceled the wedding, and vanished into his empire, convinced he'd dodged a bullet. He never looked back. Until today. Today, the bullet had ricocheted. The court battle, initiated by a surprisingly tenacious legal team on Isabella's behalf, wasn't about money, not directly. It was about parental rights, about acknowledging the 4 tiny lives now resting in her arms. Quadruplets. The word had hit Elias like a physical blow when his lawyers first informed him. He'd spent weeks in a fog of disbelief, then denial, then a simmering rage. How could this be? And why hadn't he known? The thought of an inheritance claim, a calculated scheme, still festered at the back of his mind, polluting any nascent feeling of responsibility. As the judge, Justice Eleanor Vance, known for her stern demeanor and unwavering commitment to what she deemed right, entered the room, a palpable silence fell. Elias straightened his tie, a purely habitual gesture. His eyes, however, were involuntarily drawn to the soft sighs and tiny movements coming from Isabella's side of the aisle. For babies. For entirely dependent, entirely innocent beings. It was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the sterile, calculated world he inhabited. He watched Isabella gently adjust one of the blankets, her touch instinctively tender. A wave of something he couldn't quite name, regret, bewilderment, washed over him. He'd built his empire on steel and concrete, on logic and ruthless decisions. But here, in this moment, logic crumbled. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a market fluctuation. This was life, for times over. And suddenly, the carefully constructed walls around his heart felt less like a fortress and more like a tomb, trapping him in a lonely silence that echoed with the ghosts of promises he'd so carelessly broken. The court clerk called the case, and the battle truly began, not just for legal standing, but for Elias's very soul. The initial court hearings were a blur of legal jargon, paternity tests, and the relentless flash of cameras. Elias's team, slick and aggressive, tried every angle, questioning Isabella's character, suggesting financial opportunism, even attempting to discredit the children's parentage despite overwhelming DNA evidence. Isabella, however, remained remarkably composed. Each time she spoke, her voice was soft but firm, laden not with bitterness, but with a weary clarity that resonated deeply within the courtroom. She spoke of the initial shock, the fear of facing for lives alone, and the sheer, unadulterated love that had blossomed in her heart for her children. Elias, for the first time in years, felt profoundly uncomfortable in his own skin. He found himself not listening to his lawyer's confident assurances, but watching Isabella. Her hands, calloused now, carefully unswaddle the tiny hand, revealing miniature fingers that curled instinctively around her own. He saw the genuine devotion in her eyes, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships he usually navigated. He remembered the vibrant, hopeful woman she had been, brimming with artistic dreams and a kindness that had once felt like a balm to his jaded soul. The woman before him now was forged in fire, stripped of superficiality, and radiating an authenticity that was both disarming and profoundly unsettling. His world, once so orderly and predictable, was unraveling. The media, usually fawning over his latest deal, now painted him as a heartless villain, a man who abandoned his pregnant bride. His board members, though outwardly supportive, cast nervous glances his way. Even his usually unflappable assistant, Marcus, looked at him with an uncharacteristic mix of pity and concern. One afternoon, during a recess, Isabella approached him, the quadruplets asleep in their specialized pram. His lawyers immediately stepped forward, but she waved them off with a gentle firmness. "Elias," she began, her voice low, "this isn't about money for me. It's about them." She gestured to the pram. "They deserve to know their father. And you, Elias, deserve to know them. Whatever you believe about me, they are innocent." He stared at the tiny faces, perfectly formed, each with a distinct, delicate beauty. One yawned, another twitched in its sleep. For distinct personalities waiting to emerge. It wasn't a financial calculation or a strategic move. It was life, raw and undeniable. He saw a flicker of his own stubborn jawline in one, Isabella's soft, full lips in another. A profound, uncomfortable shift began within him. For years, he had meticulously controlled every aspect of his life, every emotion. Now, faced with the undeniable reality of these four tiny beings, the carefully constructed facade of indifference began to crack. The next day, Elias did something he hadn't done in years. He bypassed his lawyers and spoke directly to Justice Vance. He requested to spend time with the children. The request sent ripples of shock through the courtroom. Isabella looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise, a hint of something fragile, perhaps hope, glimmering within them. This was not the Elias Thorne anyone expected. The external conflict of the courtroom was slowly, painfully, igniting an internal one within him. The man of steel was beginning to rust, exposed to the bewildering, overwhelming truth of his paternity. He was no longer just fighting a legal battle. He was beginning to fight himself. The first visit was awkward, stiff with unspoken regret and the buzzing energy of four curious infants. Elias, accustomed to boardrooms and balance sheets, felt clumsy holding a tiny, squirming baby. Isabella watched him, a quiet observer, offering gentle guidance when a head needed support or a swaddle came undone. He saw the subtle differences in each quadruplet. Leo, the calm observer, Maya, the wide-eyed explorer, Finn, the feisty one with a surprisingly strong grip, and Chloe, the tiny dreamer who often smiled in her sleep. Each interaction chipped away at the icy fortress around his heart. He found himself mesmerized by their miniature perfection, by the sheer miracle of their existence. Over the following weeks, the courtroom, once a battleground, became a backdrop for an unexpected reconciliation. Elias started arriving early for the visits, sometimes even bringing small, age-appropriate toys that his assistant, Marcus, had painstakingly researched. He learned to change a diaper, to burp a baby, to sing off-key lullabies. The look of utter disbelief on his face when one of the babies grasped his finger with surprising strength slowly transformed into a hesitant, then genuine, smile. He saw the fatigue etched on Isabella's face, the constant juggling act of caring for four infants alone, and a profound sense of shame began to settle in. He hadn't just abandoned a bride, he had abandoned a family. The turning point came when Finn, normally the most independent, cried inconsolably during a feeding. Isabella, already exhausted, looked close to tears herself. Without thinking, Elias instinctively scooped the baby up, walked around the room, murmuring soft words, and to everyone's astonishment, Finn quieted, eventually falling asleep on his shoulder. In that moment, a profound bond solidified. The old Elias Thorne, the man of steel, began to melt, revealing a surprising capacity for tenderness. In court, during the final arguments, Elias stood, not at his lawyer's table, but beside Isabella. He addressed the judge directly, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "Your Honor," he began, surprising everyone, "I was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. My pride, my fear, my arrogance, they blinded me to the truth. These children, my children, deserve a father. Isabella has been a remarkable mother, and I want to support her in every way possible. Not just financially, but as an active, loving parent. Isabella looked at him, tears finally brimming in her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of astonished relief and a burgeoning hope. The judge, a seasoned veteran of countless bitter disputes, simply nodded, a rare, almost imperceptible softening in her stern demeanor. The court battle didn't end with a declared winner and loser in the traditional sense. It ended with a commitment, a promise of shared responsibility, and, more importantly, a burgeoning family. Elias still ran his empire, but his priorities had irrevocably shifted. His mornings now began not with stock reports, but with the joyful chaos of quadruplets. He funded a foundation for single mothers and became an advocate for children's rights. He and Isabella, though not rekindling a romantic relationship, forged a deep, respectful partnership rooted in their shared love for their children. The mystery of the anonymous email was eventually solved, a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge, but by then, it scarcely mattered. The revelation had, ironically, led to a far greater truth. Elias, the millionaire, had been stunned silent by his abandoned bride's quadruplets, but it was in that silence, and the subsequent noise of tiny lives, that he finally found his voice, and in doing so, redeemed himself. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel and enjoy these other amazing stories.